as we prepare for the start of the new legislative session, we wanted to provide a deep dive on how things work and what to expect. Here's that story from our Elise Klein.
Each year, the New York State legislative session takes place in Albany from January to June. During each session term, lawmakers go through the process of passing hundreds of bills, passing the state budget, and holding countless public hearings. Terms for members of the legislature are 2 years, and there are no limits for state lawmakers, which means they can serve as long as they are able and elected to do so. Some lawmakers, like Assemblymember John McDonald, a Democrat representing the Capital Region, have served for over a decade.
So this will be my 13th legislative session.
Each session of the state budget takes up a large portion of lawmakers' time.
It's mostly about the money. It's about finances and making sure we put forth a strong budget that represents all New Yorkers' concerns.
For some advocates, the budget is a big part of how they address issues impacting New York communities. Rob Hayes, the Senior Clean Water Director for Environmental Advocates New York, says one of their top priorities this upcoming year will be ensuring full funding for clean water.
This past session, the governor tried to cut funding for the Clean Water Infrastructure Act by 50%, but luckily the legislature and the governor worked together to restore that funding to the full amount in the final budget. Given all the new needs we see across the state to protect clean water, including by replacing lead pipes and getting toxic PFAS chemicals out of our water, we're advocating for an increase in that funding source to $600 million.
Some Democratic lawmakers say the budget each year allocates funding for important issues and at the same time lacks in areas lawmakers feel they could do more, like affordability. Senator James Skoufis, a Democrat representing Orange County, stresses affordability tackles many areas, including education, housing, utility bills, and property taxes.
So we have to do a lot more. We should be exclusively focused on this as a top set of priorities. And certainly the budget presents the best opportunity to do so.
Affordability will also be a focus for the governor. She plans to unveil a proposal to give New Yorkers inflation rebate checks as part of her State of the State address. The State of the State happens each year before the budget process begins and usually takes place a few days after session starts. During the State of the State, Governor Hochul will talk about a variety of proposals to address issues such as affordability. Following the State of the State, the governor proposes her plan for the state budget. Lawmakers then review her plan, hold about 13 lengthy budget hearings on varying issues, and come up with their plans, also called one-house budget resolutions. Then legislative leaders and the governor meet for budget negotiations for weeks, even months, before a final budget can be voted on. The state budget deadline is April 1st, and in recent years, negotiations have stretched beyond that deadline, resulting in extenders. Some Republican lawmakers say when it comes to the budget, what they are consistently disappointed in is policy such as bail reform. Senator George Borrello, a Republican representing portions of the Finger Lakes, says policy doesn't belong in the budget.
The part that I have always disliked coming from county government is the fact that we have policy, often controversial policy, that is in the budget. That just should not be.
Some lawmakers this next budget cycle are anticipating challenges around what to expect from Washington with a second Donald Trump administration coming in. Senator Natalia Fernandez, a Democrat representing parts of the Bronx and Westchester, says the biggest concern is funding cuts.
A lot of what we do, the federal government sometimes matches. If they choose to reduce their funding, then we will have to figure out how to maintain that funding. So that is going to be a question looming, in my opinion. And we won't know till we know.
Other lawmakers agree. Assemblymember McDonald says while he isn't sure the new presidential administration will have an impact on this budget cycle, he is still concerned.
I think the concern with Washington is that if there's a block grant or basically a capping of what money will be sent to New York, that it may cripple a lot of the existing programs. So we're going to have to be very vigilant.
Skoufis says it is important to be ready for potential cuts, but it is also important for the legislature not to get ahead of themselves.
And so we certainly do what we have to do to protect our financial best interests here in New York, but also not get out ahead of our skis and predict things that may or may not come to fruition.
The focus in Albany, however, isn't solely on funding. For some advocates, their focus is outside the budget. Corinne Carey, who has been an advocate for 10 years, says her priority each year remains the same: make medical aid in dying legal in New York.
I think that coming to the Capitol to advocate for this law after you've lost a loved one is painful for many of our advocates, and I share that pain. But it's also incredibly cathartic to tell these stories and to watch lawmakers change their minds after hearing some of the stories that we have to share.
Carrie says while the journey hasn't been easy, she is confident this year will finally be the year the medical aid in dying fight comes to fruition.
It takes sometimes a decade for major social change like this. This is not my first rodeo. With the New York Civil Liberties Union, I worked for many years to pass significant social justice legislation. And so I think 2025 could be our year.
Advocating at the Capitol typically happens on Tuesdays, also known as Lobby Day. Hundreds of groups travel to rally and meet with lawmakers about their cause. Carrie and other medical aid in dying advocates each year rally for their bill. They also set up demonstrations for the issue, highlighting New Yorkers who have died painfully, New Yorkers who wanted relief from a medical aid in dying law. Many advocates like Carrie have priorities outside of the budget. Hayes says environmental advocates are pushing for legislation to get rid of polyfluoroalkyl substances or PFAS chemicals in products.
You know, the chemical industry continues to produce more and new PFAS. I think we're up to now 9,000 PFAS chemicals in existence, of which we regulate only the tiniest fraction. And the more that we learn about these PFAS chemicals, the more dangerous that we realize that they are. That's why we need a holistic approach to ban the entire family of PFAS chemicals from products so we can stop that contamination at the source and prevent pollution of our water that requires so much time and energy and money to clean up.
3 bills are intended to do this by banning PFAS chemicals in consumer products, menstrual products, and beauty products. Senator Leah Webb, a Democrat representing Binghamton and a lead sponsor of the Beauty Justice Act, says all of these bills are important for protecting New Yorkers' health.
These are the products that we oftentimes are relying upon when you talk about storage containers that also have PFAS, whether it's menstrual hygiene products or even beauty products. These are things that we are heavily relying upon. And so it is imperative that we ensure that while we're utilizing these products, that they are not creating long-term health issues that truly could have been avoided.
The Beauty Justice Act is one example of the many bills that didn't make it across the finish line this previous session. Each session, lawmakers pass hundreds of bills, sometimes thousands. In the previous session, they passed around 800 bills. One of those bills, the Retail Worker Safety Act, passed both houses and was signed by the governor. The Retail Worker Safety Act would require employers to develop and implement programs to prevent workplace violence, direct the Department of Labor to produce a model workplace violence prevention training program, and require the installation of panic buttons or wearable mobile phone-based panic buttons at certain workplaces. Theodore Moore, executive director of Align, an alliance of labor and community organizations, says it was incredible to watch this legislation pass the state legislature and be signed into law.
A lot of times we see problems, but we don't actually have the ability to come up with the solution and actually implement it. So to work on an issue that will actually, improve the safety of workers across the state and actually, embolden them to be better workers themselves and be safer in their jobs is absolutely amazing.
Moore added advocates spend a lot of time outside of the session schedule from January to June, anxiously waiting for bills they rallied for to get signed. For example, the Warehouse Worker Injury Reduction Act to establish an injury reduction program was signed just before the new year. Moore says it is a huge victory for workers.
It's really a huge deal because what WIRA does is it establishes industry-wide safety standards. So it requires annual safety evaluations of large warehouses at companies like Amazon for hazards and ergonomic fixes. It improves the training and medical care in those facilities as well. And then it gives power to the Department of Labor to implement and enforce the law.
For a bill to pass, it starts with an introduction. Then it goes through a designated committee, and if it is voted to move on, it goes to the floor for a vote. The last step is the governor has to review the bill and decide how to act on it. For a bill to move smoothly, lawmakers really have to work together, and this year there are some new members. Assemblymember McDonald says it may take some time for lawmakers to find their rhythm.
We have 21 new members in the Assembly, 15 in the majority, 6 in the minority. Admittedly, it takes a while to get to know everybody. And, that's it's important to have relationships with your colleagues because when you have relationships, you can have better conversations. You have better conversations, items that may not be of interest to me, but may be of interest to somebody in Brooklyn or Buffalo. By having those relationships, you're able to better understand them. And I think we are supposed to be a deliberative body. I'd like to think that we are.
In addition to new members, there are also some new leadership roles, including a new minority floor leader and a new speaker pro tem in the assembly who both help facilitate debates on the floor. The next pro tem replacing Jeff Aubrey has not been chosen yet, but some lawmakers anticipate this will happen by the first session day on January 8th at the latest.
And that's important. Member Aubrey, who really was the pro tem the whole 12 years I've been here, was remarkable. He could make it a light atmosphere when it was necessary, but he could also make sure that people understood that there's decorum.
The majority floor leader is Assemblymember Crystal Peoples-Stokes, who has served in this role for several years. And the minority floor leader replacing Andy Goodell, who retired last year, is Assemblymember Mary Beth Walsh. Walsh says she is excited to take on this important role.
Well, I came into the Assembly 8 years ago really wondering, like, am I suited for this? Am I going to be qualified? Am I going to fit in? Am I going to do well? And I think one of the things that feels really good about being selected to be the floor leader is that I feel that within my conference, I've earned the respect of my colleagues and the leader that I am a reasonable person, a reasonable legislator who can put words behind that and try to help lead the discussion that we do have on legislation.
Before politicos know it, the busiest time at the Capitol winds down and legislative session officially ends. Lawmakers then leave the state capitol for the year. At the end of the 2024 session last year, lawmakers returned home to their respective districts to be amongst their constituents and to do their legislative work in their communities. In the coming days, lawmakers will return to Albany for the 2025 session, many of them with a myriad of these pertinent policy issues on their minds. Elise Klein, New York Now.
And for more on that, you can subscribe to our newsletter at newsletter.nynow.org. Now turning to our last important topic. WMHT is celebrating 50 years of state capitol reporting, dating back to 1975 with Inside Albany and today with New York Now. As we reflect on the extraordinary journalism through the years, we'll be sharing a 30-minute documentary unpacking the show's legacy and impact during next week's program. For more details, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org.